Hi, and welcome to ECCB Connects. This week, we discuss the concept of beneficial ownership as it relates to anti-money laundering activities across the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. Anti-money laundering refers to the set of rules, regulations, and laws that seek to prevent illegally obtained funds from entering the financial system. Former Deputy Executive Director at the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, Loxly Ricketts, speaks with us to explain these concepts.
We're at the end of season 25 of ECCB Connects. We thank you for staying connected with us during this season. We hope that you have gained some useful tips to help you manage your money wisely and build a solid financial future.
We'll be back in September to discuss more issues that are important to you and to share how the ECCB is helping to improve your well-being and that of the people of our currency union.
While we run break, stay connected with us on social media
at ECCB Connects.
Who we are, what we do, and how we serve you.
Loxly, thank you for joining us on ECCB Connects.
You're welcome, no problem at all.
Now, we're here to talk about one of the aspects of anti-money laundering. And anti-money laundering broadly refers to those set of laws, rules that seek to reduce the ability to hide funds that stem from criminal activity. One of the tenets that fall under that umbrella of AML is beneficial ownership. It's actually one of the tools that is used to kind of manage that regulation. Now, if you would explain to us the concept of beneficial ownership.
The concept of beneficial ownership is getting behind who it is that truly owns or controls a legal person or who has ultimate effective control for a legal arrangement. So I use two terms there that might be a bit forensic: legal persons and legal arrangements. Now, a legal person is another way of grouping all the forms of companies or corporate structures that are possible to exist within a legal framework or in a specific country's economy. So that's from a basic limited liability company, limited by partnership, insurance companies, etc., foundations. All of those are considered legal persons. Legal arrangements is another word for describing what we commonly refer to in our part of the world, that is the Commonwealth Caribbean, as a trust. So a trust is an arrangement or mechanism by which the true owner of property is kept private by a trustee who is appointed legally to manage that property as if it were theirs. The idea of that mechanism is to allow, one, as I mentioned, privacy for estate planning or other activities, and also to ensure that persons who cannot yet own property in their own name still have some right and benefit from property that is being managed by a trustee. So that gives you an idea that there are some legitimate purposes for these arrangements and also legitimate purposes for companies, as you would know.
Right. So as you explained just now about the legal arrangement, for instance, a child may inherit property or funds from, a parent or grandparent. And because they are unable at that, because of age restrictions, to have access, is that in itself is an example of a legal arrangement?
Yes, a trust is created in those circumstances, but one caveat, we are specifically concerned with express trusts, not necessarily constructive trusts. So a constructive trust is like what you described. By operation of law, because a child can't inherit the property, the executor or the administrator of the estate would be the legal owner until the child can own the property. But what we are interested in is the form of somewhat professional trust services that are set up in order to facilitate asset management in particular. And those are normally provided by professional trust service providers or an individual who holds themselves out as providing those services.
Now that we've established generally what beneficial ownership is, who it is linked to, how does this fit in within the concept of money laundering activities?
Now, I'll start with legal persons. Now, legal persons or companies or such structures were created for commercial activity primarily. Go back some history, the idea of legal persons or companies began with a very old judgment from court called Solomon and Solomon, which set up the idea that a company is like a person. A company can own assets, a company can be sued, and the company is separate and distinct from the person who owns that company. So you can have limited liability in engaging in business transactions, even though you own the company, your wealth is not personally online.
Now, Loxly, you've outlined what beneficial ownership is in the context of anti-money laundering, and it ultimately speaks to who ends up controlling funds that are moved. Yes. Now, for us, would you explain why this knowledge is important in the context of the financial system?
Sure. Now, in the area of anti-money laundering and countering terrorist financing, anonymity is our enemy. And the idea of beneficial ownership and getting to the beneficial owner is premised on getting rid of that anonymity and the ability of persons with nefarious character for abusing or utilizing the framework of legal persons and legal arrangements to facilitate their money laundering. So that's in a nutshell, the very important role that is played by getting to the beneficial owner in any of these frameworks.
Beneficial ownership is not a bad thing. It exists regardless because of the different legal arrangements in play. Talk to us about the origin of needing to expose this area further.
Generally, we have an entire area of company law, and we commonly interact with businesses and companies on a day-to-day basis. We have the idea that we go to a business place and there is a business name and there's a registered office for that business, and we may not necessarily know who owns that business. That business takes our money, we give it money, that business buys things from us, and we buy things from the business. The question is, who is it that is behind that company? Who is it that actually owns the shares? But we don't stop there, because beneficial ownership goes beyond who is listed as the shareholder. It goes beyond who is listed as the nominee for the shareholder. It goes behind to get to the person who ultimately, and that's an important word, owns or controls that legal person and who has ultimate effective control of a legal arrangement. Now, why I stress those differences is because you may not be on any document whatsoever as the person who owns any shares in a company, but there might be a power of attorney document which has you telling the person who is listed as the shareholder what to do with all of these shares and this property. And you may be a person who is actively laundering money or yourself on a sanctions list, and we need to be able to identify you. It gets a bit more complex because I read somewhere that they say lawyers are magicians. We create fictions that become real. A company can own another company, and a trust can own a company. And so there can be layers of ownership of what are in truth fictions, but are very real in terms of their economic impact and capability, and very real in their susceptibility to abuse for money laundering and terrorist financing. So practically, that is why we have to set up mechanisms, and each country is required to have mechanisms to facilitate getting to who is the true owner, beneficially or controller, and requirements to keep that up to date and accurate, because it can change.
And now for this week's financial tip.
Make a consistent allocation to an emergency fund. This will serve you as a buffer during financial hardship. It is recommended that you have an emergency fund of at least 3 times your monthly salary or income.
Here's where we end this week's episode of ECCB Connects, where we've been discussing the concept of beneficial ownership as it relates to anti-money laundering with Loxly Ricketts, formerly of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. We delve further into this discussion next week as Ricketts outlines the regulation of money laundering activities in the region and the important role you play in this regard. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.